Learning lesson number 2, artwork on the boat. This is episode 27. I've been kind of setting up some of this stuff here. When it comes to some more artwork, going through this practice project, kind of learning experience with After Effects, and now we've got Illustrator. We're going to try to make some magic happen. I mean, to be honest, like I've been trying to go through this today, and I'm like about to fall asleep. But you know, I've been up early this morning because that's what you gotta do when you're on a boat. I'm gonna eat this snack and get into this here. Well, Bush 7T, you know what they say. When you cut a chicken's head off, it just runs around. Running around like a chicken without its head. So I've got, this project. Hopefully we can get through this pretty well and then get to like some exciting points. But yeah, that's kind of my stream for today. Let's make sure the timer is set. Probably gonna go over an hour today. But we want to make sure we start it here on the old ship. Hope everyone's doing well, enjoying their weekend. Look at that sunset. It's very cold here, by the way. It's really, you can't tell, you can't really see on the water, but it's really cold. I need to get some sardines. That would be great. Also I would love to do a food review, but yeah, I might make some fish here in an hour. But this will be a very, this stream here on the USS Nili on the ocean, it's not going to be that exciting, so you've been warned. But cheers to the ones that stick around. All right, let's get into this. Here we go.
Layer, because I will be rebuilding these in After Effects, so these will serve mainly as a reference. And these.
All right, so by the way, this is kind of difficult to figure out. Let me see if I can bring this up here. There we go. So what I'm doing here, and it's hard to see, but I'm trying to add this font here. We've got some fonts going on here. Putting these fonts on one layer, which is called type, which I guess typography. That's probably what that means. So putting the type on one layer. And basically following what this bro is doing here. Outline
cleaned up and I don't need to think about. Start grabbing, the left arm or the type, making a new layer, naming it, placing it somewhere in the stack, and then forgetting whether I've cleaned up that layer or not. With this format, I know that once I start grabbing something and putting it in a layer up the top here, if it's in a layer up the top here, it's already cleaned up and I don't need to think about it. It's sort of like a sorting algorithm if you've ever done programming, and for a simple file like this, it doesn't take long at all. So just find the overlay layers, select those, drag them to the top, and then I'll lock that layer to show, hey, everything's in there that I need. I'm going to grab the wands from over here, drag that up, and lock it. And for this wand, I'm actually going to use this vertical wand here. If I ever have a diagonal asset that is going to move around in After Effects, I like to get a nice vertical wand and just center it to the composition. That way, when you're editing the rotation property, it's less confusing because you know what 0 degrees and 90 degrees is going to look like. And we can actually delete these wands here. Now let's lock it for real. Let's get all the type elements, put them in the type folder, and so you can move them.
All right, so the type elements, which is layer 13. All right, it's all this stuff. Drag this up here. Great.
Them all at once, I find it helpful to group them with Ctrl G and then drag them all up in one go. Now these stars can go all on one layer because I will be rebuilding these in After Effects. So these will serve mainly as a reference. And this grid here, I'm not exactly certain if I'm going to be animating it, but if I do want to animate it, it's going to be very helpful if it's separated on its own layer. So I always err on the side of maybe separating that layer just in case I need to when I'm in After Effects. And actually the backgrounds can all go on one layer.
Grid. I don't like grids, but looks like we're gonna have to use them. So this grid right here. I'm just gonna copy and paste it. How about that? Looks like it's not working. So there we go. Lock it down, lock it down.
I probably don't need to animate the vignette, so we can get rid of that. There, and pretty much everything else on all the other layers can now be deleted. Okay, now we can save this layer, and let's make 2 copies, one for Make and one for Magic.
Wait a minute, he did not do the star. Yeah, stars needs to be moved. Also, these are the stars. So these go into this here, up here. And the background. Okay, so all of those layers are set. They each have their own page.
And then in each of these files, we can go in and delete the other one, and delete any excess layers from either of them. And now we're left with 2 really clean Illustrator files, which should, by my calculations, be the ideal way to work with these in After Effects.
Great. All right.
lots of After Effects projects. Okay, we're in a new project, and this is the project template that I use. So essentially I have this file saved as an After Effects project on my hard drive. Now to load your own template whenever you create a new file, you go up to Edit, Preferences, New Project, and here we've got checked that a new project loads a template, and we see the file path where my template is saved. So every time we create a new project, all these folders will be loaded up by default. And you can include elements as well, assets, if you use them commonly enough. But I've just got folders. And if you don't use all the folders, like we're probably not going to use textures in this document, we can delete that, and we've already saved some time. Or you can just ignore it and leave it there. But that does save me, a few minutes every time I start a new project. And when you're creating lots of After Effects projects, that adds up. So let's start by importing our Illustrator files. They'll go in the AI folder. Press Ctrl I to open up our imports. And let's import these both as composition retain layer sizes, and we can create a composition for those as well.
All right, so I need to save this here. Underscore layers. Okay, so this here is, all the files are set. Now I need to import the graphics. We've got a lot right here, but I don't think this is the right one.
Every time I start a new project, and when you're creating lots of After Effects projects, that adds up. So let's start by importing our Illustrator files. They'll go in the AI folder. Press Ctrl I to open up our imports. Let's import these both as composition retain layer sizes, and we can create a composition for those as well.
Okay, composition, retain layer sizes, import. There it is.
There, these comps can both go in our pre-comp folder, and we can close our imports. But we are also going to drag in a couple of other files. We're going to drag in our 3 style frames, and we are also going to drag in a palette that I've made. This is a color palette I made in Illustrator with all of the base colors that we used in the style frames and the designs. And this is really handy for eyedropping and selecting colors, especially when you've got a lot of gradients in your design and it's harder to select from existing layers because you might be selecting a combination of different overlays and effects and blends between colors. This makes sure that you can always choose the correct base color. And you don't always need it, but it comes in handy more often than not, and I make one for almost every project. And it's better to be a PNG rather than a JPEG, and you can even import a straight Illustrator project, and that will work too. Okay, now let's set up our main comp where we're going to put everything in place before we need to start animating. This again is part of my vegetables first approach.
Vegetables first. All right, so we've got images, lesson 1. Oh no, this is lesson 2. Lesson 2, MMD. I think I have everything. It's looking like I probably do.
So now we do all the unattractive, unappealing work, just setting up files, so then when we start animating, it's all smooth sailing and there is as few things as possible to get in the way. We're not having to stop and start setting up more comps, adding layers, and of course there's going to be some of that. That is unavoidable, but we're tidying it up as much as possible first. So we'll select both of these pre-comps, drag them into a new composition, hit OK, and
All right, so we did magic and make both into a pre-comp.
first. So we'll select both of these pre-comps, drag them into a new composition, hit OK, and we're going to call this Make Magic Main.
Make magic main. Hopefully this is it. Hopefully this is it. I'm doing things a little bit differently, but that's what this is all about. That's just the way it goes. On the USS Nilly. All right.
We can drag that into our comps folder, and let's rename these pre-comps too. We're going to call our first one S01 Make, and our magic one S02 Magic. And I put the S for either shot 01 or scene 01, depending on what type of project you're working on, and this just helps them keep them in order. Because if I just called them magic and make, magic would come before make alphabetically, and I don't like the idea of the second scene.
By the way, let me know in the chat if you think I should save these kind of, I guess, what are these, walkthrough, tutorial, educational, entertainment videos that I'm doing here. If I should save these on YouTube for anyone wanting to go through this. This is actually Ben Marriott's Master Motion Design lesson, and we're on lesson 2. Just going through it, seeing how it really is when it's applied to the physical hand. See how easy it is, how difficult it is, the process, how much time it takes, how much of a headache this stuff is. And this is lesson 2. Lesson 1, I think I still have that file, but this is lesson 2, and this is definitely getting more into the design stuff, like the setup process, and then we're getting into I don't know, Illustrator files, and I guess the proper way to put things together. It's like building a Lego ship.
In my composition being above the first one in the project panel. That's a very minor nitpick that probably won't bother most of you and isn't really essential, but this just keeps it nice and organized. Let's move our magic comp over a bit so we can see the sequence that our animation is going to take.
All right, so he's got make and magic.
My composition being scene 01, and let's rename these pre-comps too. We're going to call our first one S01 Make, and our magic one S02 Magic.
Yeah, so this one here would be called magic. This one, so you've got 3, so it's kind of confusing. This one's called make. This one's magic. So I'm probably going to use these 2.
And I put the S for either shot 01 or scene 01, depending on what type of project you're working on, and this just helps them keep them in order. Because if I just called them magic and make, magic would come before make alphabetic, perfectly, and I don't like the idea of the second scene in my composition being above the first one in the project panel. That's a very minor nitpick that probably won't bother most of you and isn't really essential, but this just keeps it nice and organized. Let's move our magic comp over a bit so we can see the sequence that our animation is going to take. And the overlay blending mode from Illustrator doesn't
Alright, so I'll delete that one, and then, so we've got these two. Got these two right here. Now, sometimes this thing doesn't play back, and the way to fix that, audio hardware settings, navigate to the preferences menu and select audio hardware. Ensure that the correct audio output device is selected. Audio hardware, the correct audio output device, which that might be, but I'm gonna pick that one. Hopefully it doesn't crash. There we go. Yeah, it's good.
Carryover. That's why these both look very washed out and very 70s, and that overlay layer should be in our main comp anyway. So let's go into our make comp, select the overlay layer, let's cut it with Control X, and navigate back to our main comp and paste it with Control V and put it on top. Now I'm navigating to this main comp using the mini flowchart, and if you're not using this, or one in the project panel, that's a very minor nitpick that probably won't bother most of you and isn't really essential, but this just keeps it nice and organized. Let's move our magic comp over a bit so we can see the sequence that our animation is going to take. And the overlay blending mode from Illustrator doesn't carry over. That's why these both look very washed out and very 70s. And that overlay layer should be in our main comp anyway. So let's go into our make comp, select the overlay layer.
There's make, there's overlay.
Let's cut it with Control X and navigate back to our main comp and paste it with Control V and put it on top. Now I'm navigating to this main comp using the mini flowchart, and if you're not using this already, it is great to improve your navigation around your project. So you can make it visible by hitting tab on your keyboard, and it pops up wherever your cursor is for maximum speed. And this essentially shows the hierarchy of your comps. Here we are in the main comp, and inside this are the two comps, Shoto 2 and Shoto 1, and it gives us this nice blue line to show us which comp we have just come from. And it is by far my favorite way to navigate. I use this mini flowchart in the project panel 99% of the time. I have kind of abandoned this panel group down here. I just don't pay attention to it at all. It is quicker for me to just go to the flowchart or the project panel, especially in large projects with lots of comps. So I really don't keep this organized or close any that I'm not using really. I would probably hide this panel if I could, but that's just my personal preference. So the overlay is on top, and let's set its blending mode correctly to overlay and lock it so we don't accidentally delete it or select it from the composition window. And Magic now has 2 overlays. Let's go into this comp and delete overlays and back out with our flowchart to the main comp. Now let's recolor these layers in our timeline.
All right, so he set overlay for that. Okay, and then locked it.
Layers of a higher importance that I'm going to be using a lot, I like to make the brightest color, so they're a lot easier to see. So Magic, I will make fuchsia, and make shall be yellow.
Oh, fuchsia. Okay, so yeah, another thing you can do on here. Let's get that fuchsia color going. Changing these colors, I'm gonna do. We'll do fuchsia and cyan. How about that? I like cyan because it looks a little bit like the ocean. It's got that water. It's got that sea salt water look.
Now fuchsia, yellow, and cyan are my go-tos for layers that I want to be able to see and select easily. But if a layer does happen to be pink, I might give it preference over being colored pink in the layers. I also try to make them thematic as well. So Magic to me seems a bit more of a whimsical pink color, so that helps it get the fuchsia priority. Now a red layer is the default for type, so I reserve that color only for type layers, and blue is the default for shape layers, so that is reserved purely for shape layers. But my nulls, however, are green. Now the default for nulls is red, but I've changed that so I'm less likely to confuse it with the type layer. And you can change all of your defaults by going up to layer, preferences, labels, and the only one that I have changed here is my null objects to green. Everything else is the default. And you can choose the colors as well to be brighter. The default colors do look a bit sort of similar, some of them. The sandstone, the pink, and the peach, I often get confused. Aqua and the lavender too, but I do choose to keep them default rather than to make them more eye-catching. And that is because when I'm on other machines, working in studios, I don't want to have to rememorize what the layers are if I'm importing my own projects. And it's just a bit simpler to have them consistent everywhere you go. It's sort of like swapping between a Mac and a Windows keyboard. It's not a huge deal, you do kind of adapt after a few hours or so, but it's just better if everything's consistent. Anyway, enough of that, let's get rid of our null layer. We also want our wand to be in the main comp, so let's cut that from this comp and paste it in our main comp here, and let's put that on top of both and color that cyan.
So he's adding the wand to the main composition. Why would he do that? Let's see here. There's the wand right there. Probably to animate it. That's probably what's going to happen. Move this around. Looks like the anchor point is all good.
I'm currently reading source name. Let's change that to layer name, so that's a little easier to read. And one more thing to set up is our export comps, because we want to export this in 3 aspect ratios. Now you won't always need these, but more often these days you will. Clients are always asking for different formats. If you animate one thing, they want you to deliver it in 8 different sizes, and it makes them think they're getting, 8 times the value for their money. And of course this was designed for those 3 deliverables, square, vertical, and horizontal, so let's set those up. I'm going to make a new folder in my comps folder. This one, 01, exports. Let's drag our main comp into a new
Exports. All right. We'll just do exports. I'm not going to do the numbers. So he's putting the main
new comp.
Okay.
Put that in our exports folder. And I want to name this comp what I want my final file to be named, so I don't have to rename it after I. And I want to name this comp into a new comp. Put that in our exports folder. And I want to name this comp what I want my final file to be named, so I don't have to rename it after I render it. So I'm going to call this make magic, and then put the dimensions at the end, 1080 x 1080, and duplicate it twice, and rename to the other dimensions, And I always put the dimensions so there's no confusion about the export. If you just put H for horizontal or V for vertical, it just makes it abundantly clear. And then we're going to open up each one of these, which just has our main comp in there, and we're going to press Ctrl K to open up the preferences and change the dimensions in here to match what it's called. Now you also might want to resize this, so
1080 by 1080, 1920 or 1820 by 1920, and then 1920 by 1080. Bush 7T, are you enjoying your Saturday excitement? Calling you out. All right, 1920 by 1080. All right, there's that. There we go. This font looks like Arial, which reminds me, I do want to play. There's this Arial video that I might play on stream to end the stream tonight. We might get into that later here on the USS Nilly. We're already 28 minutes. We've already passed the half-hour mark, but we're probably going to go over the time limits today.
We might want to scale this down to maybe 70%, so we still get more of our animation. The 1080p one we can leave as it is, but our vertical export, the 1080 by 1920, is a bit of a different story. Now, our first scene looks good, Make barely touches the edges, but Magic gets cut off. Now, when we scale it down to fit, there is gaps at the top and the bottom. There is not enough comp. Now, this is an issue that happens a lot, when a design needs to be adapted for an output that it wasn't intended for. And I'm going to throw this as an example here, because this design evidently didn't consider this vertical format well enough. So there are a few ways we could fix it. We could keep this comp at 100% scale, and then when we're finished animating, we could render the other two out, and then just scale down the text in both scenes, or we could make two copies of the final animation, make one big text and one small text. Neither of those are really ideal. If there are client changes, and there will be client changes, and you've got multiple comps that are identical that you need to make changes to, that can get very confusing, and a lot of errors can sort of get pushed out into renders and final renders. And that's not a good look when you send those to the client by accident. It's just too much to keep track of. The best solution is to tackle it now before any animation happens.
Shout out to all the bots who come by and say, hey, I'd like to do graphic overlays for your channel. USS Nilly, I'd love to do graphic overlays. Love to do graphic art. Shout out to them. You all are wonderful artists and great people. I'm also learning how to do graphic overlays too. So, if any, I guess this is like, I'm not at that point where it's like, oh, I can make graphic overlays for you, but I can kind of do it after I get through this project. Get some pizza. You're trying to get that chicken still running around. Neil Patrick Harris's 8-Bit Christmas 80s movie. Oh, 8-Bit Christmas. That sounds familiar. Is that real or is that a television show? Let me look that up real quick. I think I remember seeing a trailer for that. There's like a lot of arcade games and stuff. That's right, 8-Bit Christmas. That came out in 2021. That would be a great watch party. It is a good Christmas film, probably. I haven't seen it. I have not seen it yet. How to scale this up? I think the way to scale it would be the background and then the text.
And find a solution where you can just animate one thing and it exports automatically in the other formats. And to do that, we need to extend the height of this comp. So we can scale it down to 75, I think looks good, and we just need to increase the height and extend the top and bottom scenes. So we've taken off 25%, so let's go inside our main comp, press Command K, and we need to increase the height at least by 25%, probably a little bit higher, 2500, might be close. Let's look at that in our export comp, still looking a tiny bit short, so let's increase it to 2600. Okay, that is going to fit. So now what we need to do is just stretch out the backgrounds for these two scenes.
So the height needs to be bigger, 2,600. Do that.
At our main comp, we can scale it down. You need to and to do that, animate one thing and it exports automatically in the other formats. And to do that, we need to extend the height of this comp. So we can scale it down to 75, I think looks good, and we just need to increase the height and extend the top and bottom scenes. So we've taken off 25%, so let's go inside our main comp, press Command K, and we need to increase the height at least by 25%, probably a little bit.
Oh, I see what he's doing. Okay. Billy Baru, hello, welcome. Welcome to the USS Nilly. Yeah, donuts. Donuts are always a nice thing to have in the morning, especially on the weekend. Or even the weekday.
Bit higher, 2500, might be close. Let's look at that in our export. At our main, I think we'll animate one thing and it exports automatically in the other formats. And to do that, we need to extend the height of this comp. So we can scale it down to 75, I think looks good, and we just need to increase the height and extend the top and bottom scenes. So we've taken off 25%, so let's go inside our main comp, press Command K, and we need to increase the height at least by 25%, probably a little bit higher, 2500. Might be close. Let's look at that in our export comp, still looking a tiny bit short. So let's increase it to 2600. Okay, that is going to fit. So now what we need to do is just stretch out the backgrounds for these two scenes. And of course we should increase the height of those as well. The background we can scale up without losing any detail.
Beige t-shirt at Target. Courage, the Cowardly Dog. They still sell those t-shirts. It's funny. Is it not? I guess it's just not fitting you very well. Bush 70. It's always tough. I had a t-shirt once. I thought it was really cool, and then I was wearing it, and I was like, I think people have the imagination that like there's something wrong with me. Like I don't leave my parents' bedroom. I think it was a shirt that said "Vote for my cat," and it was like a cat face. It was like a drawing. What's up, D Lizard? The D Lizard, the streamer, streaming better than Video Junkie, but I'm not gonna say that. Let's Happy Saturday. Welcome to the USS Nilly. Yo Man told a 3-minute story about an hour with a cliffhanger. That's crazy. Well, today's stream is learning lesson number 2, artwork on the boat. This is episode 27. Going through some magic here. 1080 by 1920. All right, we're at the point where we have to extend the background, which is this. Scale it up. That looks terrible. Okay, there's 1080 1920. That doesn't seem to fit still. Okay, so the magic, this thing has to be changed. The magic composition. Try 3000. 3000 on the height. Scale up the background. $155. There it is. Magic is set. Now this one just needs to be set. So this one is make. Composition settings, 3000. Scale 155. For the BG. There it is. That's all set.
and the grid is probably going to be fine to scale up as well. And only do these with flat background layers. Don't be scaling up, important characters or text or anything like that beyond 100% if it's not rasterized, because you're going to get some artifacts. Let's do that for make as well. And we'll also need to do that for our overlay. And a shortcut to fit it to the height of your comp is Control-Alt-Shift-G. There, now we've got our vertical export looking hunky-dory. Now this does make our main comp slightly bigger, so it might take slightly longer to render, but it will make exporting a much easier process. So let's get started animating.
All right, before we get to the exciting animation point, I gotta fix this one up too. We've got something that's not fitting. Oh, it's this overlay. There we go, 132.
Now the first thing you want to start animating is the biggest action. Normally in any scene there is one element or one motion that drives the whole scene. Sometimes there might be two, but there's usually one, and once that one thing is animated, it will make everything else easier. And also if you run out of time in the shot, if the main element is animated, it's going to look much better than if only the background elements or details are. Now for this scene, this is going to be the wand. So we're going to animate the wand first, and then the transition, which of course will be dictated by the path of the wand, and then the details like the motion and the type and the stars. So let's get started with the wand. Now we want the tip of the wand to come in from the right, do a loop over here, and exit up in the top right corner, pulling up a mat that we will create and expand that will reveal shot to this magic scene. And it's almost like a figure eight, it'll go whoosh, whoosh. And at this point, I'm thinking about how that motion feels. I'm holding a pencil like a conductor and waving it around. I'm sort of finding the motion that I want. And that's very easy with a small prop, just holding.
I think we got a pencil. We want to do a wand action, like some kind of Harry Potter move. By the way, you're watching the USS Nelly Learning Lesson number 2. Artwork on the Boat, episode 27. This is it's not a very exciting stream, I must say. Here's the wand. Here's the wand that I'm going to use to create this animation for Harry Potter on the new Harry Potter show. Sponsored by Disney Plus. Let's make some magic. Don't make it Blue Disney. Yeah, Disney might sue. They're definitely hurting for money, I'm sure. Shout out to Disney. Disney Channel. Hopefully they did not copyright the word magic. Food poisoning from the Harry Potter? Oh, better tweet that out. Maybe you'll get a coupon from Harry Potter for a free drink of Moogle something, whatever they have. That's terrible. That's terrible. Make sure you go to the, get some just potato chips. It's probably fine. Or some fish. I would suggest some salmon, some, what else? Oh yeah, I've got shrimp too. Caught some shrimp the other day. It needs to be thawed out.
I mean, from the right, do a loop over here, and exit up in the top right corner, pulling up a mat that we will create and expand that will reveal shot to this magic scene. And it's almost like a figure eight, it'll go whoosh, whoosh. And at this point, I'm thinking about how that motion feels. I'm holding a pencil like a conductor and waving it around. I'm sort of finding the motion that I want. And that's very easy with a small prop, just holding a pencil like this. But also, don't be afraid to act out motion in your
Definitely not going to make any woke content. Disclaimer. Wokeness has been dispelled.
scene with your whole body if you need to. And of course, make noises. Noises always help. And I think anything helps that puts a guide in front of you where you want your animation to go, what you want it to feel like, or what you want it to look like. And these may change as you're animating, but in a few minutes or a few seconds, you can get it clearer in your head, and that really pays off and makes it an easier process. So we need our wand to come in like this. And there are two properties that we'll need to animate on our wand to make it look good in that motion. There's a position and rotation. Now we can only do one at a time, and I am a big fan of reducing the animation as much as possible, especially with more complex motion, by removing as many elements that we don't need to think about now. And like we talked about before, this will make the next step easier. So animating the position will make animating the rotation a lot easier. And it might be a tiny bit distracting if we're moving our wand and it's still stiff straight up and down. That might make it harder for us to see the animation path how it truly is. So it might be easier to animate the path on a null and then parent the wand to it. Now, if this project had about 50 layers, I'd be less keen to add another layer that isn't totally necessary, but I think it will help to animate this position property separately. So let's create a new null with Control Alt Shift Y, or you could go up to layer new null, of course, but I will be hammering home those shortcuts in this course as much as possible. And let's move our wand down so that the tip of the wand is on the very corner of that null, which is where that null's anchor point is, and then parent the wand to the null, of course. And let's rename that null wand path. And in this animation, we are going to be doing some diagonal motion. So there's no avoiding the speed graph editor this time. So first, let's just start by blocking in.
All right, so he's got this. Thinking of suing. Wait, did you hear about Florida Man? He's suing Netflix for the slow connection of Mike Tyson. I did not hear about that. Thinking of suing Netflix, but as well, but looking for Mike Tyson's button. Huh. He's really selling. He's really suing. That's funny. That 99% lag time really screwed up everything. I gotta look that up real quick. Let's take a look. Florida Man sues Netflix.
What do you think? What are you?
Oh, this should be good.
Man has launched a class action lawsuit against Netflix over its streaming issues during the height of the highly anticipated boxing match between Mike Tyson and Jake Paul. Now, according to the lawsuit filed Monday in Tampa, the man alleges roughly 97,000 people were met with buffering issues while trying to watch that historic match. I think we're all among them here.
This is the first I'm seeing of the fight now because
yeah, I just saw the word buffering. Yeah, he claims Netflix failed to fulfill its contractual obligations to its customers. Yep, the plaintiff is also asking for a trial by jury.
oh man, this is a class action
Yeah, it is.
lawsuit, so anyone can join this. We have the attorney's information on that Free 10 Tampa Bay app. I wanted to see more there.
Yeah, I hear it was not a great fight. Yeah.
Doctor reacts to the disturbing Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul fight.
As a sports medicine doctor, this fight was one of the most.
Great. Well, I don't think he's
There,
gonna.
Hillsborough County man has launched a class.
He's probably not gonna get very far on that suing Netflix. I think that's one of those things you guys gotta deal with it. Just gotta go with the river, go with the flow, as they say. As they say down at the creek. Doctor reacts to stage 5. Yes, it was. The doctor says it was staged. There's so many. There's so many videos about that.
About your
that
friend Mike
fight.
Tyson tweeted that he almost died over the summer. He said he had a bunch of blood transfusions, just had to fight to get healthy, and then his performance yesterday against Jake Paul. Just your thoughts on what we saw.
Mike Tyson was right, and I was wrong. When you guys know the whole story about Shark Week, and if you don't, I begged him not to do the Roy Jones fight. You're too old. I love you. I don't want to see you take any more punishment. So I set him up on Shark Week. He got paid good money. And he's like, you fucking... So he almost flipped out the last day and was ready to kill everybody on the boat because he had to jump in with all these sharks again in the middle of Florida. And he's like, this fucking asshole says that, he cares about me and everything else. I've been fighting since I was 12. And he throws me in the fucking ocean with a bunch of sharks. He was right about that, too. But he basically said, I told him, Mike, you're basically 60 years old. And he's like, you honestly think this fucking kid's gonna do anything to me? He's not good. He's not gonna fucking knock me out. He's not gonna do this. And you saw him, he tripped when he was walking down the thing. He had a hard time walking up the stairs. He had a knee brace on, and Jake Paul couldn't do anything to him. He made a ton of money, and I know people are mad. You stayed home on a Saturday night, but you didn't pay for it. You know what I mean? And,
Well, Mike Tyson lost, so there is that. There is that. Anyway.
In roughly the path we wanted to take. So like we said, we wanted to start in from the right, keep him its position there, then it should swing upwards, then loop downwards, and then exit upwards and to the right. Now how does this look when we play it back? Beautiful. Well, not quite, but that's okay. We've just got our keyframes down. Now we need to sculpt them. This is as if you're throwing down your clay. It doesn't look like a beautiful vase yet, but it will, and it needs to look a bit ugly before it looks great. So let's grab our Convert Vertex tool.
All right, I see what he's doing. Let's get these keyframes going here. So we've got the null objects. This is such a terrible way to animate.
Over here under the pen tool and turn these motion paths into arcs just by clicking and dragging each of these points, each of these vertices. Alright, that's already feeling a little bit better. One thing that I do want to correct is the path of this arc here. I want to make it so it sort of swings down in this motion. Now generally a motion like this will tend to favor a sort of downwards arc. Let's just imagine for a second we're moving from the top left corner to the bottom right hand corner of this comp. If we're going straight, it would be a straight line between the two, but if we want a nice arc, we can do it one of two ways. We could either arc upwards, so it would arc like this, or we could arc downwards, so it would arc like this. Now I think it's because it's more natural to go with the gravity. The path of least resistance, natural objects in the real world would favor that downward arc. That's not always the case, but if there's no reason otherwise, I always favor a downward arc. And because this wand, as predicted, is a little distracting because it's just pointing straight up and down, let's create a stand-in for our wand. So I'm going to create a new circle with our ellipse tool and just draw a small circle near our wand tip. Let's color it white, put it below our layer, and we can even hide our wand. Now we can align it to our null, and I'm just looking at its anchor point to do that. And I have the anchor point in the center of this shape layer because I have that set up in my preferences. You go to Edit Preferences General. We've got this option to center anchor point of new shape layers, and that comes in handy more often than not. But also what we can do is we can copy the position keyframe from our null.
All right, this guy is going a little too fast. Let me slow it down here. So we made a circle, and then we're gonna put this, I guess it's gonna be anchored on the wand. I can't tell if that's the center of the wand or not. The Fantastic Four. I could definitely make the Fantastic Four logo.
Color it white, put it below our layer, and we can even hide our wand. Now we can align it to our null, and I'm just looking at its anchor point to do that. And I have the anchor point in the center of this shape layer because I have that set up in my preferences. You go to Edit Preferences General. We've got this option to center anchor point of new shape layers, and that comes in handy more often than not. But also what we can do is we can copy the position keyframe from our null, paste that onto our shape layer, and then parent our shape layer to the null here, and then get rid of that keyframe because we don't need that now.
All right, so this goes right here.
Now I've got our circle center of this shape layer because I have that set up in my preferences. You go to Edit Preferences General. We've got this option to.
By the way, what time have we got? It's already over an hour. Whew. It's already over an hour. I gotta cook some fish here, but I definitely want to continue to go through this still. So I need to get some of the fish ready. Let me see here. Maybe I can play. Maybe I can get that going here and then come back. Kind of get a video up. Let's see. What would be a good? Let's see. Boats. $10 hours. All right, be right back. All right, that's out there. That's in the it's in the oven. We've got it cooked on the old ship here. We've got the cooking going on. So I got to heat up the old oven. It's around 450, and then throw in some fish for a good 15 minutes or so. Fish and rice. It's on the old ship.
Center anchor point of new shape layers, and that comes in handy more often than not. But also what we can do is we can copy the position keyframe from our null, paste that onto our shape layer, and then parent our shape layer to the null here, and then get rid of that keyframe because we don't need that now. So now we've got our circle that follows the null. Let's turn down the transparency a little bit so we can see underneath it when it crosses our text, and let's call this wand proxy. And now I think the path of this is going up a bit way too high. Let's move this whole thing a bit further down and maybe shrink this loop a bit too. And now let's get into the easing. Now our goal here is to get this motion looking as smooth and natural as possible. Let's move this magic layer way out of the way as well, so we don't have to worry about that flashing up and distracting us, just focusing on the circle and its path. So with the easing, let's first think about where the motion will be its fastest. And this path is essentially sort of two motions. It swoops in and it sweeps out. If this was only 3 keyframes, it would be easy just to ease the middle position so that it flies in and flies out. So maybe we can achieve this with just 3 keyframes. Let's just test deleting one and then seeing if we can create a similar path. Let's ease this middle keyframe with F9 and just have a test to see how that feels. Okay, that speed does feel a little better, but I'm not happy with this motion path. It doesn't look quite as great, and I think we do need that extra keyframe in order to draw it the way we want. So let's undo all that to where we had it before. Now there is a huge benefit with this sort of, smooth arcing motion to have as few keyframes as possible, because it does make it easy to adjust. If we drew this path with 50 keyframes, it will be a real pain to adjust the easing, and it wouldn't really give us a more natural motion. So you should definitely try to use as few keyframes as possible without sort of compromising the path you want to make. So let's jump into the graph editor. We definitely want the speed graph editor and start making some shapes. Now you'll know from last week that I love the value graph editor. And that is mainly because we can separate the dimensions and animate just on one axis, the X or the Y, vertical or horizontal. But if we want diagonal motion, or motion that is not just straight up or straight across on either of those axes, we can do that, but it just gets a lot more complicated in the value graph editor. So it's much better to do that with the speed graph, and you'll see why. I'm going to increase the size of our graph editor so it's a bit easier to see. Let's select all the keyframes and just easy ease them all. So we've got some handles to work with. Okay, how does this look? Okay, it's not great, it's a bit too jerky, but it's not actually too bad. And that's because it's only taking up less than 1 second at the moment. So there's not really that many frames for us to possibly see the unnatural motion. If we were to stretch out these keyframes and animate it over 3 seconds, that jerky motion becomes a lot more obvious. And if we shorten them to half a second, it looks pretty good. And that's because we don't have enough frames to show the information that the circle is actually slowing down to a complete stop twice in this animation. There's just not enough frames for that. And we're going to cover this a bit more in our transitions and morphing lessons, that you can, hide more in a fast motion than in a slow one. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's move this back to being 1 second long. And you should definitely focus on making it look good at its correct speed. Don't just make all your animations really quick and call it a day if it's a compromise to the animation. Okay, so we want our wand or ball for now to speed in, slow down, probably around at this peak here, and then speed up out of there. So what would that look like in our speed graph? The speed would start high, it's coming in at a high velocity, and then slow down as it reaches the peak of this loop here, and then increases its speed as it falls down, and then zoom right out of frame, increasing its speed to its highest point again. So that would make a roughly sort of U shape in the speed graph. You've got high speed coming in, low speed at the peak, and then high speed exiting. So let's aim for a shape like a U. Now I think it's very valuable to just take even a few seconds to think about and guess how your graph is going to look before you start moving around all your anchor points and keyframes around, because then you've got a sort of mini plan in your head for your next move. Animation, especially in the graph editor, is a lot of trial and error. you're tweaking the arcs, the handles of the speed, and you're tweaking the motion path until it feels right. But often we can get carried away with just adjusting these things endlessly, and if it's not working, we might think, oh, it's because I haven't got this handle at the correct angle. When really, it might be that the whole motion path isn't working. And I used to do this a lot more, just get fixated on one small point, thinking that that is where my animation is not working, when I'm really missing the larger picture. So I'm not saying you need to plan everything out beforehand. Your plans will very likely change when you start seeing it in action and getting your real hands dirty in the keyframes. But a few seconds of thoughts really just gives you a little goal to head for, a little hypothesis to try. So let's give it a go making this speed graph into a U shape. Let's get the handles from either side and pull them all the way to the left, so it's at its maximum speed at the beginning and at the end. And let's push these handles out as well to increase that speed again. Alright, this is starting to look like a U, so let's give this a bit of a play. Okay, so that's looking good, especially at the start and the end. It's this bump in the middle of our graph which is causing our grief. It's kind of really jerky as it speeds up and slows down on what should really be one fluid motion. So what we really need to do is get rid of this bump. And if we just move the handles of these two middle keyframes, there's nothing we can do to make that bump disappear. It just keeps moving that bump around, moving its point of maximum speed. And that's because we can't have a flat area of the speed graph at 0 between these two positions, unless we turn these into hold frames. And that is because our null has to travel, 500 pixels between these 2 points. And you can't make that distance if you're traveling at 0 speed. So what can we do? We really just want to make this area flatter. So we could spread these keyframes out to make that journey longer, and therefore it doesn't need to go as fast, but we don't really get rid of anything. It doesn't get rid of that bump, it just sort of spreads it out and doesn't really solve anything. What we need to do is take these points off this bottom plane, this line of 0. We need to stop our speed reducing from 0 and making it stop completely twice in this animation. Because when something is at speed 0, it's a complete stop. And we don't want our circle to stop, we just want it to slow down.
Oh, that's right, yeah, speed 0. So if it starts here, then goes down to 0, slows down. So let me see. This might be what he's gonna say. Rise this up. Like that. Like each one of these. Might be what he's going for.
Down a bit. And that's not so intuitive in the way that these curves react to each other. The speed graph editor is great for increasing easing between points, but I do find the value graph a bit more intuitive for seeing and making these sorts of changes. It's just more difficult to do that when you're not making a purely vertical or horizontal moves. So that's why we use the speed graph. And in this case, the value graph is looking a lot more complicated. So this type of motion in the speed graph editor. So let's speed these points up. So let's drag them off that plane a little bit. And we do also have to drag both points of the keyframe, both ends, both handles, which doesn't really help its intuitiveness. And I know I'm painting a bad picture of the speed graph editor. But the more I use it, the more I do get used to it, and it is really helpful for motion like this, so don't let me scare you away from it. Okay, this is looking a lot more like a U shape. Let's see it in motion. Ah, that is much better, much smoother. There's no jank in the middle, no starting and stopping.
Alright, so he really, let's see, he really sets this up to be like a ramp. There it is. Getting that ramp motion going on. It's a little, I mean, that's smoother, but it also slows down significantly. Very slow.
It does feel a little bit linear though. A little bit of special.
So maybe these need to be put together.
Especially in the middle here, as if there's no easing, and that is because, you know, the main area of our speed graph is pretty flat. The main areas with the most motion are the start and the end, and they mostly happen off screen. So let's try to make this middle area a little bit less flat. And I do think we want it to be a little bit slower at this peak here. So it just rests a tiny bit more
Save the fish.
before zooming out. So let's lower the speed of this first point here, and as soon as we do that, that's going to adjust our bumps around here, and we've got to tweak those to be
You gotta
smooth
eat
again.
the fish.
And if
That's
we
why
want the
they're
motion
out
to be
there.
the slowest at this point here, this third keyframe at the bottom of the loop kind of needs to just blend into this curve. We really want its motion to be invisible. So let's move it a little later in our timeline, so our wand has time to rest at this top of the arc a little longer. That's looking a little better. I think we want it to be a bit faster around this section here. So let's move this up. And again, we're just trying to draw as smooth of a U shape as possible. And in my head, I'm imagining I want this curve to look a bit more like this.
It's like a it's like a
This is
half
the point
pipe.
the
It's
graph
like a
has done,
skateboard.
where it's very like-
I look at it. It's like a skateboard ramp. What he's showing is like a skateboard ramp. But like this here, this section here has more of just a ramp up half pipe. So it kind of slows down at this section, and then it gets that slowed down, that momentum, that curve momentum kind of focuses the energy. I don't know. I need to learn physics to have a better vocabulary with this stuff, but there's like a focus and if you ever done like bobsledding or on a roller coaster, or if you're on a bike or skateboard, you go in on this like line here and then slingshots over. think it's like these two. Maybe like that.
Likely you're going to spend lots of time just slightly adjusting things until you get the right sort of shape and curve that you want. And it does become a little tricky because we don't have these handles that we can sort of rotate diagonally. All we can do is pull them closer and further away from the vertex. Alright, now this is looking much better. Now we do have this sort of tiny little bump in our speed graph here where it doesn't look super smooth and it looks pretty ugly. But when we play back the animation, we don't really notice it at all. And that's because if we look closely and drag our playhead over it, this little bump that happens in between our frames 20 and 19. So if we ignore this little bump here, it does actually look kind of smooth if we were to just sort of track the points. If we were to put dots every frame, there'll be one here, and one here, and one here. This sort of bump of ugliness is happening in between frames. Again, that would look really bad if this was happening over, 4 or 5 seconds, and we could see all of this harsh motion, but it actually looks fine in this context. And now that this timing is pretty close, we can go in and adjust the path as well, and that's not going to affect anything too much. As long as it's not too drastic and changing the distances between 2 points a lot, it's fine to adjust this to create a more ideal motion path if you're not in love with it at the moment. There, I'm happy with that. And there is another way that we could approach this motion, and that is by using Rove across time. So if you find that a keyframe is getting in the way of the easing of an animation, kind of like this one is, you might want to try this. Because really, as far as easing goes, we want this keyframe to be invisible. If we could just ease between this keyframe and this keyframe and ignore this one, that would be ideal. We want this keyframe's position to direct the motion path, but not its easing. And that's exactly what Rove across time means. So if we go into our timeline, and select this keyframe, we can right click and choose Rove across time, and now it becomes a smaller dot on our timeline.
Rove across time, huh? I don't know what he just did there, but I'm gonna have to take a quick break. I got this fish. But I want to continue to go through this. We're already past 1 hour. The stream tonight is learning lesson 2, artwork on the boat, episode 27. There's a look at the water. Going through this right now. Maybe we'll take a quick break. Let's see if we can check out the because I definitely need to have some fish, that's for sure. All right, so I'm gonna do a be right back. And then we'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the USS Nilly Stream Topic Learning Lesson 2, Artwork on the Boat, episode 27. We're live making some artwork here, and also I've got to eat some fish, but I don't want to stop the stream. Plus, we're going over an hour, so what I'm going to do. When this fish is ready, I'm gonna have some fish, and then there's a little video about fonts that I thought would be kind of fun to watch, since had so many of those font streams. Might as well keep them going. Font documentary projects. Here, let's see. This guy, I think he gets into the font stuff. Yeah, I definitely want to check this out. But I gotta make sure the fish is good. So I'm gonna do one BRB, and then I will be right back. All right, we are back at it. Here is the meal. I should get a good camera shot of this fish here. This is actually like, there's a large fish chunk. Check this out. That's from the sea right there. Some old fish. So yeah, that's great. It's tough. It is tough streaming and like trying to eat dinner as well. Having a meal, a nice fishy meal. Oh, BuzzViewer's underground essay is looking to get banned. All right, let's check this out.
That people will hear in Field Production 1 is
fonts.
I hate that font. To me, font is text that's going to add information that you, in a way that's more efficient than could be gotten another way. It's a multi-purpose tool. You can like double the meaningful impact of an image with a couple of words.
Sarcasm is the reason for fonts. You need some sort of special way to emphasize certain words, and by changing the font of the word, I think you can really convey the expression that you were intended.
Where there's a depiction of something, then there's a word. Those two together can be more than the sum of the parts. They can create a thought or idea in the viewer's mind.
Depending on the word that you're trying to create is why we have so many different types of fonts, because we have so many different types of words. The point of the matter is, fonts can have an effect on people beyond what they actually visually see.
The benefit to the recipient of a well-crafted font is they don't have to struggle to understand what the filmmaker's trying to show them or tell them. Can I read it? Is it legible? That's pretty much the two ideals.
Legibility. You got to be able to read it. If you can't read it, it's not a good font.
It's immediately obvious to the momentary glance. The most common phrase that people will hear in Field Production 1 is, I hate that font. And that's because people will ignore the variables that they have to work with. They will choose the most garish, cheap, trashy font template that there is. You have thousands of choices to make. You don't have to make all those, you can make just a few.
A lot of times people will just put the font on there, find the color that they wanted, maybe add a drop shadow, and then ta-da, they're done. And that's the thing too, there's hundreds of options to add to the font. So just the shape of the letter isn't just everything. But one effect isn't enough. The stroke, the line outside the letter, the spacing between each letter is occurring there, how much distance between the row above it and the row below it, these things all need to be factored in.
A bad font is one that is partly discernible and partly not discernible. White on white, bad. Dark on dark, bad. Some sort of recessive or receding color as an outline, as a border, that's bad. And receding colors are the cool colors, the ones in the blue part of the spectrum. And advancing colors are the ones in the warm part of the spectrum. If it's some crazy oddball font that you put there because you've never seen it before and you think, okay, this is really going to make a great impression. This is very creative. This is not the usual run-of-the-mill. This is special. I chose a special font, and the viewer has to look at it and go, what the hell is this? What is this written in Elvish or something? That takes 2 seconds for the viewers to just kind of shut off their mind, and they start thinking about something that they want to think about.
Confusion is the worst effect from a bad font. If for every project, stick to one font. You want to run with a theme. People want to try to make every word unique, but sometimes that's not the overall idea. Don't try to just mash it up to make it look different, because honestly, it just becomes more confusing. So find a font for your project and stick with it.
But inevitably, people will scroll down through these hideous templates that are already there. I avoid the templates naturally. I just scroll down until I see one that I know it's going to be simple, clean, and stand out. It should be white or yellow. If you want to get more creative than that, then you have to be very careful. Build it right on top of the image that you're going to have it on. Build it right there so that you can undo any mistakes as they occur. Say you make a wise choice and you have a white font, and that shows up very well against the dark part of the background that's in your image, and it disappears completely when you get to the bright white window that's there. There's a few other things you can do to get it to stand out from the background. One is a drop shadow. It's going to separate your text, which you want to be the foreground. It's going to separate it from the background. And you have an infinite variety of drop shadows and transparency for the shadows. What color it is, whether it's in sharp focus, whether it's...
By the way, this is 10 years ago. This is a 10-year-old video about fonts.
In soft focus, a white drop shadow that will separate and lift, almost 3D style, your text up from the background image. Sometimes it's interesting if you use complementary colors, but don't overdo it, because they separate from each other very well. You put yellow and blue together, the yellow makes the blue bluer, and the blue makes the yellow yellower.
What? He's saying the yellow makes the blue bluer? Is that okay? So that's complementary. So they complement each other. That does kind of pop a little bit more now that I look at it than just the blue and black.
Makes the yellow.
And the blue on the yellow makes the yellow yellower. I had no idea that was a real word. Yellower.
Yellower.
Ideally, characteristics of a good font. It depends on what you're trying to convey. So again, if it's...
Wow, look at this font. We got some sans serif going on here. Mike Bennett. What is it? EF? ESCSC Digital Media Professor. Is that an F or
It's just a name of a...
Yeah, EFSC.
Logo, for example, if it's a tasty food, you're going to want something that's kind of elegant looking, maybe a little curly, a little swooshy. If it's, for example, a box of ammunition, it needs to be a little bit more blocky, a little more aggressive looking.
Yeah, look at that ammo. Look at that ammo fonts. Let's go back to that. That was looking great. Blocky.
A little more aggressive looking, when in reality if you apply the drop shadow and then add a little bit of a stroke and then add a little bit of this effect, maybe put a gradient across the letters, you really can kind of make a more dynamic looking effect. It will come out looking a lot more professional that way too.
Fonts on television and in video.
We're all about professional here on the USS Nille. That's one thing we're all about. Stream topic is learning lesson 2, art of the boat. Artwork on the boat. Yeah.
Text are more common than anybody ever thought that they would be. The crazy business channels like CNBC, they'll have like 17 different fonts going at the same time. There'll be bullet lists down one side, there'll be a crawl across the bottom, there'll be another crawl across the top. And
we got all kinds of fonts on this screen. Let's check this out. Breaking news. We got bold, and then we got both of it's italicized, bold and regular. Goldman Sachs, that's a different font style. These down here, the tickers, they're their own style. I know they almost look similar, and then you got the green So this is a mess.
Across the bottom, they'll crawl across the top, and people will sit there and they'll jump around like crazy, finding the information that they want.
Word processors are the most common places where fonts are found. Of course, in advertising and marketing, everyone tries to make their own unique font so that their brand stands out. These become icons unto themselves, so the font itself can become kind of very recognizable. Times New Roman is a great standard font as far as just being a standard font. It's very legible in any type size, all the way down to 4 or 5 points big, all the way up to huge and massive. It's very easy to read. Depending on what it is, the message that you're trying to convey, again, will depend on the type of font you want to use.
I usually start with white. I always put a border on it.
I prefer either black text on a white background or white text on a black background. I find if it's print, the black text on a white background looks better. If it's a visual screen, something that's lit up where there's light actually being emitted, I find that white text on a black background works.
He likes dark mode. Dark mode on a screen, that's what people like. That's what I did here. White text on a black background. So maybe he'll enjoy my stream. Be right back. All right, we are back. This is pretty good. This is a pretty good documentary about fonts. There's a few of these actually. Helvetica. How Helvetica became the biggest font in fashion and beyond. It's Behind the Hype. History of
I'm your football obsessed.
History of typography. This topic goes on forever. What do we the neutrality?
Baskerville, a name seen on every computer and read by millions of people every day. But the man who created this typographic phenomenon remains a mystery, a many-faceted genius who rates scant mention in the history books or in discussions of Birmingham's industrial past. Who was the man behind this famous typeface? And what do we know about him?
Who is this man?
John Baskerville was born in Wolverley, Worcestershire in 1706. By the age of 20, he had moved to Birmingham to work as a writing master. He also found employment carving headstones. Early in his career, a passion for lettering was apparent.
Baskerville was clearly a highly skilled individual. The only known example of Baskerville stone carving that exists is a slate plate in Birmingham Library, which advertises his business as a stonecutter.
The slate is one of those few things where we can actually touch Baskerville, where we can actually touch his lettering, and we can feel the characters. It's not just a two-dimensional printed character, it's a three-dimensional thing.
He's a 3D dimensional.
Baskerville had a keen eye for commercial opportunities as well as for good design. At this time, the art of Asia was fashionable and in great demand. Yet heavily lacquered items were beyond the pockets of all but the most wealthy. To fill this demand, entrepreneurial manufacturers in the West Midlands made large fortunes producing Japanware, which was found in many middle-class homes. Baskerville saw the commercial opportunity this market created.
Somebody called John Taylor had set up a Japanning manufactory in Birmingham and had very quickly made a fortune for himself. Baskerville latched onto this, and he too thought, yeah, that's a good way to make money. And he did. He made himself extremely prosperous.
Baskerville does seem to have been an innovator in Japanware. There is a patent that was taken out in his name. We don't have any known surviving examples of Baskerville's products. That doesn't mean they don't exist. It's just that they're very difficult to identify. Producers of Japanware didn't name themselves usually as manufacturers of their products.
Baskerville was set up for life by making his Japanware, but he now wants to go back to where his passion was. I think Baskerville had always had an inquiring mind. He wanted to know how...
Okay, we got it. So that's Baskerville. I think the thing is with him is this is great. Maybe this will be for another stream, but we got to stick on topic. We got to stick on topic somehow. I think he actually, let me see, do I have his font in here? I think it might be in here. Baskerville. It's probably not how it's spelled. There it is. Right off the bat, it looks very similar to Times New Roman. All right, so there's Times New Roman, there's Baskerville. I don't know, it looks very similar. The question is, can you spot the difference? Which one is which? I mean, look, there's very slight differences here. We have the E right here is a little shorter in the middle. We have a little bit more sans serif going on up here. The Times New Roman. We've got the K a little thinner up top for Baskerville, Times New Roman. A little more thick. The B. Baskerville has more of a belly, that's for sure. Bottom. This one here is more of a symmetrical shape. Wow. Very similar. Who would have guessed?
And also a dot in our curve. And if we move our keyframes backwards and forwards, we don't really notice it at all. And that's because if we look closely and drag our playhead over it, this little bump that happened. Now this is the point in the graph editor where it's very likely you're going to spend lots of time just slightly adjusting things.
Getting back into it. We're going to get back into this.
Until you get the right sort of shape and curve that you want. And it does become a little tricky because we don't have these handles that we can sort of rotate diagonally. All we can do is pull them closer and further away from the vertex. Alright, now this is looking much better. Now we do have this sort of tiny little bump in our speed graph here where it doesn't look super smooth and it looks pretty ugly. But when we play back the animation, we don't really notice it at all. And that's because if we look closely and drag our playhead over it, this little bump that happens in between our frames 20 and 19. So if we ignore this little bump here, it does actually look kind of smooth. If we were to just sort of track the points, if we were to put dots every frame, there'll be one here and one here, then one here. This sort of bump of ugliness is happening in between frames. Again, that would look really bad if this was happening over, 4 or 5 seconds and we could see all of this harsh motion, but it actually looks fine in this context. And now that this timing is pretty close, we can go in and adjust the path as well. And that's not going to affect anything too much. As long as it's not too drastic and changing the distances between 2 points a lot, it's fine to adjust this to create a more ideal motion path if you're not in love with it at the moment. There, I'm happy with that. And there is another way that we could approach this motion, and that is by using rove across time. So if you find that a keyframe is getting in the way of the easing of an animation, kind of like this one is, you might want to try this. Because really, as far as easing goes, we want this keyframe to be invisible. If we could just ease between this keyframe and this keyframe and ignore this one, that would be ideal. We want this keyframe's position to direct the motion path, but not its easing. And that's exactly what rove across time means. So if we go into our timeline and select this keyframe, we can right click and choose rove across.
Rove across time.
Time, and now becomes a smaller dot on our timeline and also a dot in our curve. And if we move our keyframes backwards and forwards in time, it moves along with them. The same thing if we adjust the curve in the graph editor. It moves in line to accommodate the easing we've applied. This keyframe is now moving, and think of roving as moving because that's kind of what they mean. So now we can make a smoother curve, but it doesn't quite have the control that you might like from a regular keyframe. But it's very handy in some circumstances, and I wanted to show another technique of achieving this. And it actually doesn't look too bad in this situation. I think I prefer our motion from earlier, so let's undo and go back to that state. And I think we've got our position animated sorted. So let's go and add the wand back in and animate its rotation. So let's turn our wand back on, and now let's block in some rough rotation keyframes. Open up our rotation, and of course we're thinking about what sort of direction we'd hold the wand, which direction should it be in. So at the start, let's point it towards the left, and our anchor point is in the wrong place. So I'm going to move the anchor point up to the very top of the wand. Have it pointing to the left, maybe minus 40 degrees. And then when it gets to near the peak, maybe it swings back down, maybe goes to plus 20 degrees. And then when it heads back, it goes back to maybe minus 40. Now let's see how that plays. Okay, that looks okay. It does look like it just bonks off the edge of the composition here though. So let's add some easing, and then let's go in and adjust those. Okay, a little better. Let's go into the graph editor, and Let's go into the value graph, hooray! Now, it does look like it's bonking on the left here, so I think we need to have it much further in this rotation by the time it gets to this point. So let's make these much steeper. So we've got that ease in the middle. This is kind of becoming a reverse U shape. And let's increase the easing by spreading out this bulge in the middle as well. How does that look? That looks pretty good. Let me zoom in so you can see that a little bit better. Yeah, that's looking good. Maybe increase the angle of this one going out just a touch. There. And another thing that I like to do to add a bit of interest to the motion is to just put these handles at a slight tilt. So it makes the motion path a bit asymmetrical. Now this won't work for everything, but sometimes if you want a bit of sort of natural variance, especially this rotation keyframe is in line with, let's say, a position keyframe from our null. If this is on a slightly different angle, it means the sort of speed at which these properties change are very slightly different. If they're both flat, it means they're at the same speed at 8 frames and the same speed at 16 frames. But if we tilt this one, it means the rotation is going to be moving a bit faster at 8 frames and a bit slower at 16 frames. And again, that helps make things just feel a little bit more organic. It is very subtle, and often you don't want things to feel organic, you want them all moving in sync in line at the same speed. But I think this works here. And again, this is something you could tweak for hours, trying to get the perfect motion here. But I think this is working great enough as it is. And if you are under time pressure to, deliver a job, this kind of motion isn't the thing that's going to make or break the animation. We're not going to spend as much time in this as we are on the position, because that is the biggest motion and that's going to have the biggest impact. So that's where we should spend our resources. And this is clearly good enough to say, hey, let's move on and get to the next stage of the animation, which will be the peeling matte transition.
Yeah, I definitely think that's probably good enough.
Now onto the peeling transition. And of course, we're going to do this peeling transition with a matte, and that matte will reveal our magic comp, which is just out of frame here. But first, let's drop in our peeling style frame to take a look. Now, if we turn it on and off, we can see that our wand is a little bit lower than it is in our style frame. And that's okay. It is important to match your style frames, and especially if they have been signed off by your client, because it is what they are expecting the final animation to look like. But for frames that are in motion, like this style frame is, and there's a lot of movement going on, you should be trying to capture more the spirit of the style frame, not the exact pixels and position of the elements. Now, past me in the past, when I made this style frame, I didn't know what path the wand would take to look best. So we don't have to stick 100% to the decision to have the peel happening at this angle in the frame. Present me, animator me, outranks past me, designer me for animation decisions. It's a small difference, but I think that makes sense. If you didn't design the frames yourself and you're unsure if you should deviate from the designs to make the overall project better in animation, I think you should, but definitely flag it with your art director and or the designer. There's a great quote from Helmuth von Moltke the Elder, a Prussian military leader, said, "No plan survives first contact with the enemy." When you get into animating, which is contact with the enemy, that's the first time that you're going to discover your designs, your plan, might need to change. Maybe just a little bit to allow the animation to work. Am I over-dramatizing it? Absolutely. Nevertheless, let's move on to the matte. Now there's no fancy effect to make this matte. CC page turn will not cut it here. We're going to have to animate it the old-fashioned way, frame by frame. But don't be scared. Sometimes it is much quicker to roll up your sleeves, and for 12 frames, I think, let's turn off this style frame. Yeah, I think there's going to be about 12 frames, half a second of this matte peeling. So 12 frames, just tweaking a path shape, we can do it. There might be a cleverer way to do it, but if it takes 2 hours to make it work, when we could have just done it with 15 minutes of brute forcing some keyframes, it's probably not worth trying to explore and find a super clever way. Now, I love a clever solution, a unique stack of effects that make some interesting results, but the fundamentals of animation, moving some lines every frame, is a safe and secure method. You know it will work. And it might not even be quicker. Most of the time, it's probably not going to be quicker, but you will have full control over everything. You do have to make more decisions. You have to choose almost every frame, every point of the shape. But that also means you're not limited to the parameters of your fancy effects. And something like this, you shouldn't be scared. Again, it's only 12 frames. You can draw 12 frames that roughly follow this shape. So let's break it down. It is roughly a triangle shape with one point that is attached to the one tip and the other 2 points that are going to essentially trace the perimeter of our composition until it's all filled up. And these lines are sort of curved in an arc format towards the center. That's not that hard. We can handle this. Now, if you haven't done much frame-by-frame animation, it might take a bit more practice before your animations look as smooth and you're more comfortable diving in, but the principles are the same whether you're drawing at every frame or you're tweaking the line in the graph editor. So we know roughly what the animation will look like. Let's just get stuck in, get our hands dirty, and make it. Now, we could make this matte on a shape layer or on a solid with some masks. There's not a huge difference to either. I prefer to animate on a solid with masks because masks are just a bit more versatile. You can add them and then subtract them from the shapes, and you can feather them. Not that we'll be doing that here, but you've just got a few more options. So let's create a new solid with Ctrl+Y. I'm going to call this matte peel. And I like to keep my matte layers all labeled purple in my timeline. I like to choose obnoxious colors like bright purple or green, so it's very obvious.
All right, so matte peel.
Add them and then subtract them from the shapes, and you can feather them. Not that we'll be doing that here, but you've just got a few more options. So let's create a new solid with Ctrl+Y. I'm going to call it.
You guys hear that? I think there's something on the boats. What is that noise? Ooh. It sounds like there's some another ship passing by with some supplies. Just some construction going on, that's all. That's all. If you're just joining us, we're learning lesson number 2, artwork on the boat, episode 27. And definitely going past an hour tonight. Definitely passing through the hour timeline. The sun is setting.
List matte peel. And I like to keep my matte, not that we'll be doing that here, but you've just got a few more options. So let's create a new solid with Ctrl+Y. I'm going to to call this matte peel. And I like to keep my matte layers all labeled purple in my timeline. I like to choose obnoxious colors like bright purple or green, so it's very obvious and won't end up in renders by mistake. So let's put that below our wand, and we can hide our wand proxy too. And we can also turn down the transparency of this, maybe to 70%, just so we can see underneath. We'll turn this up later. And let's find a nice spot mid-peel. I think about 23 frames works well here. And we're just going to grab our pen tool and start drawing a peel shape from our style frame. I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to draw the mask fairly large, larger than we need it to be, just so we've got a lot more options with vertices later. And as I'm drawing this curve with the pen tool, I know I'm going to want this anchor point or this Bezier handle to, point in this direction. So I can make that adjustment on the fly without taking my finger off the mouse clicker by holding Alt or Option, which activates this handle, and then I can point it back in this direction and then start drawing other curves options. And we're just going to grab our pen tool and start drawing a peel shape from our style frame. I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to draw the mask fairly large, larger than we need it to be, just so we've got a lot more options with vertices later. And as I'm drawing this curve with the pen tool, I know I'm going to want this anchor point or this Bezier handle to, point in this direction. So I can make that adjustment on the fly without taking my finger off the mouse clicker by holding Alt or Option, which activates this handle, and then I can point it back in this direction and then start drawing other curves and continue finishing up our shape. All right, there's our mask. Let's tweak that. Now let's zoom in close. That actually went pretty close. We want that to be right on the exact tip of our wand. And just create the ideal sort of peeling shape. There, I think that is looking good. So let's keyframe this mask path. Keyframe the path property. And then we're going to move forward 2 frames. Let's zoom in on our timeline. We need to get much closer to see all these frames. And then 2 frames later, which is frame 25, we're going to adjust this to continue this path. And it looks like our wand is completely off screen here, but we can still see its null shape there. So we can take the point way up there and then adjust the peel shape to how we imagine it peeling a bit further. Something along those lines is looking good. And again, we're just roughly placing these points. We're probably going to edit almost all of these in a little bit. And now that our shape is completely off screen, in a few frames, let's go maybe frame 34. We're just going to move these points to fill up our screen. And let's move these Bezier handles to flatten them out. And let's easy this keyframe with F9. So now we've got the end of that peel sort of filling up the screen. All right, that's not looking too bad. Now we're going to do the reverse. Like go backwards every 2 frames, and every 2 frames, adjust the point to hit the tip of the wand, and then adjust the other vertices in the mask. As we get over to this point, this is really easy. Again, tip just follows the wand, and then it's going to start coming out from this sort of...
All right, this is where it gets into the details. This is where the challenge begins.
That's not looking too bad. Now we're going to do the reverse. Like go backwards every 2 frames, and every 2 frames, adjust the point to hit the tip of the wand, and then adjust the other vertices in the mask.
All right, so every 2 frames.
As we get over to this point, this is really easy. Again, tip just follows the wand, and then it's going to start coming out from this sort of side wall area. There, now I've got 5 keyframes down. That's not too many. Let's take a look at how that looks. That's already looking pretty close. Let's trim this matte so it starts at this frame and play that back. 5 keyframes in, and it's looking like this. This is not bad at all. It's much easier than it looks when you think about animating all this frame by frame. There's definitely some areas that need work, but this is around 80% of what we need for this effect. We've done the hard part, now the rest is just going in and tweaking the details and not too much thinking going on. So now we want to go in between each frame, so in between maybe keyframe 21 and 23, we just want to make sure the tip is lined up with the wand and the other shapes look like they're in a natural position, which they should be. And then in between these 2 keyframes, adjust it to be at the tip of the wand, same as earlier back here. And then we might want to do a frame here as well, where our wand is looking suspiciously almost vertically, but I think that looks alright in motion. And now we're at the stage where we are going to just scrub through this animation many times, looking for a few inconsistencies of where we can smooth things out. We want to think about the motion as well. So our wand is sort of speeding up towards the end here. So it would be dragging this, front part of our, peeling area a lot further than it would these areas. So maybe in between these 2 frames, these back areas of the peel here maybe shouldn't be moving as far. So maybe I can push those back a little bit and maybe adjust their angle so they're a bit more sharper. And in these few frames here, I kind of wanted to feel like this peel is coming a bit more from the upper side of this left edge. At the moment, it kind of feels like it's just more of a linear wipe slightly. So I think if I move these points upwards a little bit on these frames, it might look like it's coming more from the direction that the wand came in, which is from up and to the left. All right, I think that is looking pretty good now. I am happy with that. But this peel does kind of come out of nowhere from this edge, and I think that is fine. No one is going to watch this and pause to say, wait a minute, this magic makes no damn sense. So I think this could work here because we are in such a magical realm, but I think it would be a bit more smooth if we introduce this matte a little bit earlier, when the wand is sort of near the top here, sort of charging up its magic while it's resting, building up a little bit of anticipation for this big movement here. So let's extend this matte out a few frames further, and we're going to make a smaller bit of matte appear at the top of this wand. So are we going to use the same matte that we've used here? No way, because there is way too many points, and that's going to be are in such a magical realm, but I think it would be a bit more smooth if we introduce this mat a little bit earlier, when the wand is sort of near the top here, sort of charging up its magic while it's, resting, building up a little bit of anticipation for this big movement here. So let's extend this mat out a few frames further, and we're going to make a smaller bit of mat appear at the top of this wand. So are we going to use the same map that we've used here? No way, because there is way too many points, and that's going to be way too complicated on a small, simple shape. So on this frame before, on the the previous frame, this frame 17, let's just drag this mask off screen so it disappears and draw a new mask. So I'm going to draw a roughly teardrop shape, which is going to be, I guess, the prequel to this big peeling shape here. So let's keyframe this mask's path at this point, and on this next frame we can get rid of it. Just double click and drag it off the edge so it disappears. And then on this frame before, we want to sort of make it look a bit like it's about to become this next frame. Something like that could work. Now, like we did with the other mask, let's go back every frame and adjust it to be a bit smaller. And if you are finding it's hard to see your handles, maybe if your background color is similar to the handles of your mask, you can change the colors down here, and you can even choose a custom one. Let's choose a big bright blue. With the other, and shape, frame 17. Let's just drag this mask off screen so it disappears, and draw this mat out a few frames further, and we're going to make a smaller bit of mat appear at the top of this wand. So are we going to use the same map that we've used here? No way, because there is way too many points, and that's going to be way too complicated on a small, simple shape. So on this frame before, on the the previous frame, this frame 17, let's just drag this mask off screen so it disappears and draw a new mask. So I'm going to draw a roughly teardrop shape, which is going to be, I guess, the prequel to this big peeling shape here. So let's keyframe this mask's path at this point, and on this next frame we can get rid of it. Just double click and drag it off the edge so it disappears. And then on this frame before, we want to sort of make it look a bit like it's about to become this next frame. Something like that could work. Now, like Like we did with the other mask, let's go back every frame and adjust it to be a bit smaller. And if you are finding it's hard to see your handles, maybe if your background color is similar to the handles of your mask, you can change the colors down here, and you can even choose a custom one. Let's choose a big bright blue. There we are. Much more visible, although there's a nice bit of contrast with this background anyway, so that wasn't too much of an issue. But if you do run into an issue, now you know how to fix it. So at this point, we're just gonna make this really small, like a tiny little circle at the end of the wand. All right, so that's another, I suppose, just 5 frames drawn there. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that looks pretty good in motion. I think this frame and these 2 frames are a bit too different. This round teardrop shape is catching my eye when I watch it back. So maybe I'll make it a bit straighter, maybe a bit smaller. And with these kind of frame by frame sections, it's good to, of course, scrub through the timeline just with your playhead and just notice if any shapes sort of stick out as not right. This shape looks maybe a bit too flat on the edges, so I'm going to adjust the points to make it a bit more rounder, or at least not as pointy on the edges. And there, I think our matte is done. It is nice and smooth, so we can turn its opacity back up. And I haven't even colored it purple, like I said. I like my mattes. Yes, let's color this purple, so it's consistent with the mattes in all my other projects. You might want a different color for your mattes. You might change it between your projects. That's up to you. And now we can drag our magic layer back closer into our work area, and we are going to use the peel matte as an alpha matte. Now let's zoom in a bit and see how that looks. And there we are, our peeling matte is looking very nice. And this is almost all of the animation done on this shot. We've got a bit to do on the stars and the text, and then we're going to add some final polish and effects to bring it all together. This shape looks maybe a bit too flat on the edges, so I'm going to adjust the points to make it a bit more rounder, or at least not as pointy on the edges. And there, I think our matte is done. It is nice and smooth, so we can turn its opacity back up. And I haven't even colored it purple, like I said. I like my mattes. Yes, let's color this purple, so it's consistent with the mattes in all my other projects. You might want a different color for your mattes. You might change it.
We're going to do seafoam green for that color, and then, all right, this needs to be 100
between your projects. That's up to you. And now we can drag our magic layer back closer into our work area, and we are going to use the peel matte as an alpha matte. Now let's zoom in a bit and see how that looks. That's up to you. And now we can drag our magic layer back closer into our work area, and we are going to use the peel matte as an alpha matte.
All right, alpha. This is a track mat. This needs to be alpha.
Turn its opacity back up. And I haven't even colored it purple, like I said. I like my mats. Yes, let's color this purple. So it's consistent with the mats in all my other projects. You might want a different color for your mats. You might change it between your projects. That's up to you. And now we can drag our magic layer back closer into our work area. And we are going to use the peel mat as an alpha mat. And let's zoom in a bit. Yes, let's call this purple. So it's consistent with the mats in all my other projects. You might want a different color for your mats. You might change it between your projects.
There it is. Matte peel. Okay, so it's magic. And the matte peel is the top layer.
That's up to you. And now we can drag our magic layer back closer into our work area. And we are going to use the peel mat as an alpha mat. Now let's zoom in a bit and see how that looks. And there we are. Our peeling mat is looking very nice. And this is almost all of the animation done on this shot. We've got a bit to do on the stars and the text, and then we're going to add some final polish and effects to bring it all together. And with these kind of frame by frame sections, it's good to, of course, scrub through the timeline just with your playhead and just notice if any shapes sort of stick out as not right. This shape looks maybe a bit too flat on the edges, so I'm going to adjust the points to make it a bit more rounder, or at least not as pointy on the edges. And there, I think our mat is done. It is nice and smooth, so we can turn its opacity back up. And I haven't even colored it purple, like I said. I like my mats. Yes, let's color this purple. So it's consistent with the mats in all my other projects. You might want a different color for your mats. You might change it between your projects. That's up to you. And now we can drag our magic layer.
I think I just made this backwards. I think I just reversed this. I think I really made this backwards. I think this was supposed to go the other way.
Closer into our work area, and we are going to use the peel mat as an alpha mat. Now let's zoom in a bit and see how that looks.
Yeah, this is supposed to go. Yeah, I made that backwards.
There we are. Our peeling mat is looking very nice. And this is almost all of the animation done on this shot. We've got a bit to do on the stars and the text, and then we're going to add some final polish and effects to bring it all together.
Well, I'll have to start over. I'll have to start this one over again. Whew.
Okay, now we're tackling the next most significant part of the animation, and that is the stars in the background of our...
I don't think I could do the stars yet. It's actually supposed to start right there, which I could just start it there. Or what I could do is just reverse the frames. Might make the most sense. Or better yet, I think I can time remap this. Basically, this wand is just flying through the screen, revealing the layer under it. Not the smoothest, but it does the job. Whew, it's quick. You know, for this one, I think I'm gonna have to start from scratch, redo it all over again. The problem is, I think I spent too much time on this. I'm definitely getting a headache at this point. But did make some good progress on this. So, number 6 out of 8. Number 6 out of 8. I'll definitely save it. I think I just need to get back. I just need to restart the animation part here with the masks. Get back at that. Oh man, I think I need a break though. I kind of want to get back into this tomorrow. And then just plow through it. It's getting there. It's definitely getting there. think doing there's all kinds of fun effects to do with that. But there's the frames. It's only like 12 frames, so it's so quick. I need to get it so it's a little more smooth. Takes a while. This definitely takes a while to get the hang of. Definitely takes a bit of time, but it's pretty enjoyable, I must say. Well, this has been Learning Lesson 2, Artwork on the Boat, episode 27. Magic, making the magic happen. I think I'm going to wrap up the stream. I think I'm going to have to call it a stream here at the USS Nili. It's been a good one. It's been a good one, but it's definitely time to wrap it up. All right. I will see y'all next time, and thanks for watching. Appreciate it. Stream number, hold on. Before we, I gotta fix that up. It's 27, not 25. It's 27. But yeah, I might stream again tomorrow. Try to continue some of this. There we go.